I gave away $3 million for a dream that wasn't mine, and when I showed up at the door, I was told, "Don't come over, you're embarrassing." Few words have ever cut so deep, turning generosity into humiliation and love into rejection. That was the moment everything I believed about family shattered. Before we dive into today's story, I recommend you hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell, so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. If you enjoy this video, type 1 in the comments. If not, type 0 to let me know how I can make better content for you. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink, because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. I have spent my life measuring things: spans of timber, tolerances and joists, years in service, and lately, the length of quiet between one memory and the next. 3 winters after Martha died, the Boston cold felt like a warehouse I forgot to heat, so I packed my tools, sold my last shares in the firm, and drove south until Spanish moss trembled over the road like lace. Charleston greeted me with a softness that had room for grief and room, too, for hope. I told myself I wasn't chasing youth. I was chasing proximity to my daughter. Madison was the little girl who once pocketed cedar curls from my planer like treasure. She grew up into Maddie, a designer with mood boards taped to every wall and a voice that turned brighter when a space finally breathed. Her husband, Tyler, arrived in our lives in a crisp blazer and a cloud of promises. He sells houses the way sommeliers pour wine, by describing futures, not floors. Around them, I felt both older and strangely necessary, like a foundation nobody sees but everyone stands on. When the Ansonboro listing hit the wire, Charleston hummed in a way Boston never did. The property was antebellum brick with ironwork that could charm a locksmith, shutters sun-faded to a noble fatigue, and a roofline that sagged like a tired shoulder. I knew at a glance where it would creak and where it could sing. Maddie called with that tremor that used to appear when she balanced on my boots to dance in the kitchen. "Dad, this is my dream house." I stood at my rental window, watching marshlight fold itself into the river, and I could see Christmases I hadn't had yet. I didn't throw money, I placed it. 40 years in construction taught me that budgets are moral documents. I sold the last sliver of my company and retained the rest for a retirement that never needed to apologize. The $3 million I wired was not a stunt or an escape hatch. It was a structural member. Some families pass down silver. I passed down square and level. When the bank confirmed the transfer, I texted Maddie a line I meant as a blueprint more than a blessing. Build a family, don't build walls. Ansonboro carries rules like a cathedral carries echoes. The Board of Architectural Review can tell you what color your shutters are allowed to remember. The HOA will notice how long your contractor's truck idles. Those boundaries never bothered me. Boundaries are just instructions with manners. I told Maddie I would help with the paperwork if she wanted, and keep my hands in my pockets if she didn't. She squeezed my arm and said she loved that I still smelled faintly of sawdust, like home. I moved into a modest cottage with a porch that knew how to listen. In the mornings, I walked King Street before the coffee got loud, counted the cobbles that tried to roll my ankle, and learned which oak roots had decided they were in charge. I bought a soft chair for a small study and placed Martha's picture where the afternoon light could find her face. In the evenings, I planned imaginary angles through Maddie's living room, imagining grandkids chasing each other between a piano and a Christmas tree that hadn't been purchased yet. Tyler radiated velocity. Over shrimp and grits one night, he told me he had contacts who could fast-track permits, subs who worked clean, and a vision for activations that would elevate the asset. I translated silently, as men my age do when words multiply faster than meaning. I nodded where nodding was generous and smiled where smiling was harmless. Every generation invents a new door, some of them still open into the same old rooms. What I remember most from those first weeks is the lift in Maddie's voice when she stood in the entry of that tired house, hands spread like she was measuring air. She talked trim profiles and plaster repairs, and a green so particular it sounded like a secret. I watched her see it, not as it was, but as it might hold our Sundays, and I felt pride stretch my chest in a way that didn't quite hurt. I thought of Martha's habit of patting the jam when a room felt finished, as if to thank it for standing. Neighborhood eyes watched kindly. Mrs. Whitcomb across the way appraised me with the same rigor she used on Hedges, then offered a pie that tasted like an apology for her suspicion. The mailman told me stories about summers before hurricanes learned our names. In hardware stores, men still argue gently about fasteners, as if the right screw could make a life behave. I fit there the way a well-cut tenon fits a mortise, no hammer required. I have taught apprentices that structure always precedes finish. Paint is a promise, framing is a fact. In those first days, before contractors unfurled tarps and before bids learned to lie, the fact was simple. I had given my daughter a frame stout enough to hold weather and time. The promise was simpler still. She would open the door and call it home. I let the future swing on that hinge and didn't test it, because faith, like lumber, needs a little room to expand. On the night the bank texted its final confirmation, I sat on my porch and listened to boats stitch the river back together with their wakes. Somewhere, in a house that didn't yet know us, my daughter laid out color swatches like prayer cards. I folded my hands and thanked the stubborn luck that lets love arrive late and still count. If I noticed the air thicken the way it does before a summer storm, I mistook it for humidity. I had measured most things. I had not measured how quickly a welcome can turn into weather. If you're still watching and feeling the sting of betrayal, comment number 1 below so I know you're with me. Now let's uncover what happens next. The first time I carried something to my daughter's new house, it wasn't a tool or a checkbook. It was a peach cobbler. Martha used to say that food was the truest key to any threshold, and I believed her. I wanted Maddie and Tyler to feel that, even as the scaffolding rose and the smell of sawdust lingered, there was still family warmth behind those brick walls. I balanced the dish carefully up the steps, thinking I might hand it over with a smile and maybe even sit for a few minutes among the workers. The keypad blinked at me like an indifferent eye. I typed the code Maddie had given me a week earlier, but the light glowed red. I tried again, slower this time, but the answer was the same. Access denied. One of the carpenters paused, hammer halfway raised, and shrugged. He didn't know me, just another older man on the porch with a dish that was starting to cool. Tyler appeared from the hall, shirt sleeves rolled up like he had been supervising. "Oh yeah," he said with a dismissive grin. "Change the code. Just a security update, nothing personal." He didn't offer me the new digits, only waved vaguely toward the cobbler. I handed it over, but the moment already felt soured. Security, I thought, or distance? I let it pass, telling myself they were busy. Renovations churned with schedules and inspectors, and maybe Tyler didn't realize the slight. I went home, set down my keys, and tried not to hear Martha's voice in my head asking, why would they change it without telling you? A week later came the invitation, or rather the announcement, that they were hosting a housewarming. Maddie's text said the place was finally ready to be shown off. I ironed a clean shirt, tucked a welcome card into my pocket, and carried a small bouquet from the market. It wasn't about grandeur. It was about showing up, letting people see me as the proud father who had made this dream possible. I imagined being introduced, maybe thanked, though I never demanded it. Pride, when it's quiet, can still be full. The street was alive with parked cars when I arrived. Historic facades glowed under porch lights, and music pulsed faintly from behind their iron gate. I walked up the steps, card in one hand, flowers in the other. Through the glass, I saw silhouettes moving, laughter spilling into the warm night. My chest swelled with something close to relief. Finally, I would be part of this. The door opened quickly, almost too quickly, and there stood Maddie. She wore a dress that caught the light beautifully, but her eyes darted over my shoulder toward the party behind me. "Dad," she whispered, sharp and hurried. "Don't come in. You're embarrassing." I stood frozen, card still in my hand, unsure if I had heard correctly. Embarrassing? My own daughter? Her words were low enough that guests couldn't hear, but the cut went deeper because of that secrecy. It meant she meant it. My throat tightened, but before I could speak, she shut the door halfway, leaving me with a sliver of music and the smell of catered food. Through the narrow side window, I caught glimpses. Tyler raising a glass and toast, Maddie smiling brightly, guests clapping as though this was all the work of their own determination. No one inside knew that the man left on the porch had signed over $3 million so the party could exist. I felt invisible, less than a guest, more like an intrusion. My phone buzzed. A text lit the screen. "Dad, please don't make this awkward. We'll talk later. Don't make a scene." The words pressed me further down, flattening me into a caricature of a meddlesome old man. I slid the card back into my jacket and watched the bouquet sag in the humid air. For the first time, I understood what it felt like to be erased in a place you had built. I stepped down to the walkway slowly, shoes scuffing the bricks. Guests' laughter followed me like echoes that didn't belong. I thought about the girl who once begged me to clap the loudest at her school plays, who turned her drawings into blueprints for forts we built together. That same girl now wanted me hidden, out of sight, as though my presence carried shame instead of pride. Maybe it was stress, I told myself. Hosting always twisted nerves, and Tyler's smooth hand was in everything. Still, something inside me shifted. The way you know a beam has cracked even before the ceiling sags. I felt both embarrassed and suspicious, grief mixing with a rising question. Had my gift been turned into my exile? As I reached the corner, the night air thickened. Off in the distance, storm clouds gathered over the Cooper River, their edges lit by the last trace of moonlight. I stood there for a moment, flowers drooping, card heavy in my pocket, and realized the storm was not only in the sky, it was already moving inside my family, and I had just felt the first drop. If you're still here and can sense the storm building, drop a number 2 in the comments. Let's move on to see how the cracks begin to show. I had noticed the loose handrail the last time I walked up Maddie's steps. The wood had splintered in one corner, and I thought of Owen's small hands running along it, catching a shard. A lifetime in construction left me incapable of ignoring flaws like that. So, on a bright Charleston morning, I packed a strip of sandpaper, a rasp, and a bottle of wood glue into a small canvas bag and set out. It was the kind of quiet job that required no permission, just a father's instinct to care for the place his daughter called home. Ansonborough's street smelled of jasmine and salt, the kind of morning air that made me almost believe in new beginnings. I walked past row houses with iron gates and brick paths, each one a reminder that homes could last centuries when properly tended. I approached Maddie's door with my bag in hand, rehearsing how I might joke about being her unpaid handyman. I tapped the code she had texted me weeks earlier. The keypad blinked red. I tried again, slower this time, but the answer was the same: denied. I stood back, looking at the quiet facade. The house was alive inside. I could hear the distant thud of tools, maybe a saw whining in the rear. Yet the entry remained locked against me. The cobbler incident had unsettled me, but I told myself then it was oversight. Twice now felt deliberate. My bag suddenly seemed foolish, the tools heavy without purpose. "Morning, Mr. Hale," a voice called. I turned to see Mrs. Whitcomb, trimming her hedge with precise snips. She was the kind of neighbor who cataloged everything: which cars came and went, how late lights stayed on, who left trash bins crooked. She squinted across her glasses. They've been carrying on late into the night. Music, strangers, cars blocking my driveway. It's a neighborhood, not Bourbon Street. She pursed her lips. They act like it's a club, not a family home. Her words burned hotter than the sun on my neck. I muttered an apology, as if their behavior were mine to answer for. She gave me a look that mixed sympathy with disapproval before turning back to her hedge. I shifted uneasily, then noticed something taped to the glass beside the front door. It was a notice, the city's stamp crisp in blue ink. I leaned closer and read, "Building permit, contractor of record, Arthur Hale." My own name stared back at me like a stranger. I blinked, read it again, ran my hand along the paper's edge to make sure I hadn't imagined it. Contractor of record meant liability, measured in lawsuits, fines, even jail if something went wrong. My stomach tightened. I hadn't signed a thing. I pulled out my phone and dialed Tyler. He answered with the easy confidence of a man who always had a story ready. "Relax," he said, after I explained what I was staring at. "It's just paperwork. Everyone does this. With your name, the permits move faster. No big deal." His tone dripped with casualness, as if he hadn't just shackled me to every nail and joist in that place. "I never signed anything," I said quietly. My voice sounded thin, even to me. "Come on," he replied. "It's a formality. Don't get hung up on details. You're a pro. This makes sense on paper." He chuckled lightly. "We'll toast to it at the next party." But I wasn't laughing. I stared at the permit until the words blurred. This wasn't oversight or forgetfulness. This was exploitation. They had locked me out with new codes, let the neighbors suffer from parties, and now pinned me to a role I hadn't chosen. A pattern was emerging, one I didn't want to admit. My generosity had become their shield, and my trust their leverage. I turned slowly, scanning the street. A dumpster overflowed with debris, but tucked among the wood scraps were empty liquor crates. Down the block, a truck with Evinate rentals painted on its side idled, unloading folded chairs. This wasn't just a renovation, it was a stage being set for something else. The dream house I had funded was already wearing the costume of a business. My bag of tools hung heavy from my hand. The sandpaper would stay unused, the handrails still splintered. I walked away with steps that felt less like retreat and more like reconnaissance. Each brick of the sidewalk echoed louder than the last, reminding me that I had built my life on foundations that didn't crack easily. But something inside me had shifted. I wasn't just a father carrying tools anymore. I was a man beginning to see the structure of deceit rising around him, and I knew I would need more than sandpaper to set it right. If you're watching closely and the tension is pulling you in, type number 3 below to stay with me. Now, let's find out how the first real blow lands. I chose the cafe carefully. It was one of those older spots on King Street, with a shaded patio and iron chairs that creaked when you shifted your weight. I wanted a place quiet enough for Maddie to hear me without raising my voice, but public enough that the conversation would stay civil. I arrived early, ordered black coffee, and spread a napkin across my lap, like I was preparing for something more formal than breakfast. I rehearsed the words in my head. Calm, clear, not angry. I didn't want to sound like an inspector or a lawyer. I wanted to sound like her father. She came late, as if she had somewhere better to be. Sunglasses still on, phone in hand, she slid into the chair across from me with a distracted smile. She scrolled as I spoke my first words, and I realized she wasn't here because she wanted to be, but because I had insisted. I started gently. "Maddie, I saw a permit notice on your window. My name was listed as the contractor." Her sunglasses tilted down, and she frowned slightly. "I don't really know about that stuff, Dad." Tyler handled it. He said it was fine. Fine. The word carried the weight of dismissal. I explained that being contractor of record meant legal liability, that fines and lawsuits would land on me if anything went wrong. She sighed, like I was making her late for something important. "Dad, please don't make it harder. Tyler knows what he's doing." As if summoned, Tyler strolled in a few minutes later, greeting the waitress with his usual charm. He slid into the seat beside her, grinning like a man walking into a meeting he had already won. I leaned forward. "I never signed anything, Tyler. My name is on city records as responsible for that house." He sipped from Maddie's water glass before answering. "Everybody does this. It's just a formality. You've got experience, it looks good for the project, permits fly through. It's a win." He said it lightly, almost playfully, but every word felt like nails hammered into the wrong wall. I pressed. "It's not just a formality. It puts me at risk for violations. I want it corrected." He leaned back, folding his arms. "Too late now. It's how things get done, old school or not." Maddie stared at the table, her silence louder than any defense. I realized she wasn't going to side with me, at least not here, not in front of him. The coffee had gone cold before I finished it. I left with more weight in my chest than when I came. A few days later, an envelope waited in my mailbox, stamped with the seal of the neighborhood HOA. I opened it at my kitchen table, reading words that made my stomach clench. Unapproved structure on rear patio, noise complaints, parking violations. Responsible party, Arthur Hale, my name again, branded onto problems I hadn't created. I sat back, the letter trembling in my hands. It wasn't only about rules, it was about reputation. In a historic district like Ansonborough, neighbors remembered and reputations stuck. That evening, I walked past their house. Strings of lights glowed across the back patio, the kind that belonged at a restaurant or bar, not a family home. A delivery van was parked out front, men unloading cases of wine and folding chairs. Strangers carried trays through the gate, laughing as if it were a venue rented for the night. My chest tightened. I realized I wasn't just looking at my daughter's dream home. I was looking at a business, my money transformed into a stage for someone else's profit. Later, at my cottage, I opened my laptop and searched. It didn't take long to find a slick listing under Tyler's company: exclusive soirees in historic Charleston mansion. Private bookings available. There were photos, glowing lights, long tables, glasses raised in toasts. My throat dried. That was Maddie's house, the one I funded. Advertised now as if it belonged to a world of strangers willing to pay for an evening in its walls. I scrolled past the rates, high enough to make me feel both sick and furious. I pushed back from the desk and walked to the window. The street outside was quiet, my neighbor's dog asleep on the porch, the kind of stillness that should come at the end of a day. Inside, my hands trembled with a mixture of anger and humiliation. I thought of the cobbler I had carried, the flowers wilting in my hand, the small tool bag I had brought for a handrail. Tokens of family connection turned meaningless in hindsight. They didn't want me as family, they wanted me as collateral. The HOODA letter still lay on the table, alongside the glow of the event listing on the screen. My first attempt at resolving this, the calm cafe meeting, had failed. I had been dismissed, ignored, and quietly blamed. Something colder than anger settled into me then, a resolve. They had mistaken kindness for weakness, but I had spent my life building structures that withstood storms. And storms, once they start rolling in, are hard to stop. If you're still following this painful unraveling, write number 4 in the comments. Now, let's see what happens when early efforts to fix things fail. Charleston storms have a way of sneaking up on you. One minute the air smells of salt and magnolia, and the next the sky is bruised with thunder, water pounding so hard it seems to flatten the roofs. That night, I lay awake in my cottage, listening to rain batter the windows. I thought of Maddie's house, still half finished. Its roof tar, papered in places where shingles had yet to be laid. I knew water would find its way in. By morning, my unease had hardened into certainty. I pulled on my raincoat and walked through the dripping streets toward Ansonborough. The sight stopped me cold. Water streaked down the brick facade of Maddie's house, spilling through open gutters and running into the foundation. Across the fence, Mrs. Whitcomb stood under her umbrella, pointing at the water pooling against her wall. "Your name is on that permit," she snapped the moment she saw me. Her voice carried over the hiss of rain. "This damage is coming through to my parlor. My plaster is ruined." She was furious, and she had every right. Still, the sting of being blamed for work I hadn't touched nearly buckled my knees. City inspectors pulled up soon after, yellow slickers flashing as they unloaded clipboards and cameras. They moved briskly, photographing the soaked roofline, the puddles, the swelling wood trim. Every shot felt like another weight hung on my shoulders. They weren't looking at Tyler or his contractors, they were looking at me, because the paperwork told them I was the man responsible. My name was the scaffolding holding up this mess. My phone buzzed. A message from Maddie. "Please don't come to the house. You're making things worse. You're embarrassing me." I read it twice, rain dripping onto the screen, each word a blade, embarrassing. Again that word, as if my very presence was a stain. I slid the phone into my pocket and kept walking toward the house. I wasn't leaving, not this time. Inside, workers scrambled with buckets and towels, trying to catch the leaks. The air reeked of damp wood and panic. Tyler burst out onto the porch, his hair slicked from the rain, eyes blazing. "What the hell are you doing here?" he barked. "You're undermining us in front of inspectors." He turned to one of them, gesturing at me with contempt. "He's just an old man trying to feel important. He's a burden on us." The words rang through the downpour, and for a moment I thought the rain itself recoiled. I felt my hand slip into my pocket and pull out my phone, camera already on. I held it low, recording. My voice stayed even, though my heart hammered. "You're admitting you put my name on permits I never signed." Tyler sneered. "So what? It's your name. You have the credentials. Who cares?" He said it too loudly, frustration spilling past calculation. The inspectors glanced up sharply, pens scratching against damp paper. The moment hung heavy, undeniable, captured on both their notepads and my phone. My phone buzzed again, this time with an incoming call. I answered, shielding the screen from the rain. The voice on the other end was calm, professional. "Mr. Hale, this is Atlantic Insurance. We're calling regarding a claim filed under your name for storm damage at 17 Anson Street. Can we confirm details?" My stomach clenched. My name wasn't just on permits. It was now tied to claims, costs, and liabilities that could swallow me whole. Maddie appeared at the doorway, her face pale, her dress clinging damply to her shoulders. She stepped close enough to whisper, "Dad, please leave. You're making a scene." Her eyes pleaded, but not for me, for Tyler, for appearances, for the fragile image she was trying to hold together. I searched her face for the girl who used to beam when I clapped at her school plays. She wasn't there, not in that moment. All I saw was someone who wanted me invisible. The inspectors conferred quietly, jotting notes, taking final photos. Tyler paced like a caged man, muttering about delays and costs. I stood in the rain, water soaking through my coat, and felt something inside me finally break clean. No more cobblers at doorsteps, no more quiet meetings at cafes, no more hoping that reason or memory of love would bring them back to me. This was no longer about misunderstandings. It was exploitation, plain and public. I turned, walking down the slick sidewalk, puddles splashing around my boots. Behind me, the inspectors' voices mingled with Tyler's anger and Maddie's whispers, fading into the roar of the storm. The rain didn't let up. It poured as if to strip the neighborhood bare, exposing every weak seam, every cracked beam. I thought of the houses I had built that had weathered storms for decades. I thought of how storms reveal weaknesses that sunshine hides. By the time I reached my cottage, I had made my choice. I set the soaked phone on the table, wiped the screen, and scrolled to a contact I hadn't called in years. Eleanor Park, my lawyer. She had handled cases where families turned into battlegrounds. She had a reputation for precision and steel. I dialed, listening to the rain hammer against the roof, and told myself I was done being their scapegoat. Storms always leave damage, but they also reveal what was weak all along. My trust had been the first thing to collapse. Now it was time to rebuild, not houses, but defenses, and to make sure the people who had twisted my generosity into their shield would finally face the consequences. Eleanor Park's office overlooked Charleston Harbor, its wide windows framing ships that seemed to glide with a confidence I envied. Inside, everything was ordered, files aligned on shelves, diplomas gleaming on the wall, the air scented faintly of cedar polish. It was the opposite of the chaos I had left at Maddie's house. I sat in a leather chair that squeaked as I leaned forward, laying out every detail, the storm, the inspectors, Tyler's reckless words, the insurance call that had made my stomach twist. Eleanor listened without interruption, her fountain pen scratching notes in clean, deliberate strokes. When I finished, silence filled the room, broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioner. She leaned back, eyes sharp but not unkind. "You have several options," she began. "We can petition to have your name removed from permits, though the process takes time. We can issue a cease and desist to Tyler's company for fraudulent use of your identity, or we can pursue full litigation, fraud, damages, liability." She tapped her pen lightly. "But you must understand, each option means conflict, public conflict." Her words landed like stones in my chest. Conflict meant more than courts and lawyers. It meant Maddie. It meant my own daughter seeing me as the enemy. I pulled out my wallet and stared at the photo tucked inside. Maddie at 7, holding a balloon, her hair tangled from wind at the fairground. She had gripped my hand so tightly that day, certain I would keep her safe. I wondered how that little girl had grown into someone who wanted me invisible on her porch. Eleanor's voice softened. "Mr. Hale, I've represented clients in family disputes before. There's always a temptation to hope love will override deceit. but sometimes love gets twisted into a leash. She let the sentence hang. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. My phone buzzed against the armrest. A new message from Maddie. Dad, please don't ruin this. Let it go for the sake of family. My chest tightened at the phrasing. Ruin this, as if standing up for myself was destruction, not what they had done with my trust and money. For the sake of family, she wrote, when every action had excluded me from the definition. I set the phone down, face first, unable to look at her words. Eleanor leaned forward. You have to decide if you are protecting family or enabling them. There's a difference. Real family doesn't hide permits under your name. They don't dismiss you as a burden. Her eyes met mine, steady as steel. The law can protect you, but only if you let it. I thought of Martha then. Her voice lived in corners of my memory, in the cadence of warnings she used to give when people mistook her kindness for weakness. Kindness is not weakness. Don't let them confuse the two. She had repeated it often, usually after standing up to a hospital administrator or fighting for a patient's dignity. I heard her now, as clearly as if she were in that office beside me. I rose and walked to the window, staring at the ships. Each one cut through the harbor water with a plotted course, steady against wind and tide. No hesitation, no wandering. They moved forward because forward was the only way to survive. I realized then that my own course had to be charted with the same precision. For months, I had clung to the hope that conversations, cobblers, cards, or quiet meetings would restore something that was already broken. It was time to admit the truth. My generosity had been converted into their shield, and my silence into their weapon. When I turned back, Eleanor was waiting, patient, as if she knew the decision had already ripened inside me. I picked up the phone again, not to read Maddie's message, but to place it face down on the desk. Do it, I said. My voice was steady, stripped of anger, but filled with resolve. File everything. I'm ready. Eleanor nodded once, her pen already moving across a fresh page. Then we'll begin immediately. Her words carried no triumph, only professionalism, but I felt lighter hearing them, as though a burden had slipped from my shoulders at last. As I stepped out of her office into the late afternoon, the harbor breeze hit my face, salt and clean, pushing the storm's memory further away. The sky had cleared, ships cutting across the water with certainty. I walked slowly down the steps, each one echoing like a promise. For the first time in months, I wasn't stumbling in confusion. I was charting a course. The battle ahead would be bitter, but dignity was worth the cost. And if Martha could see me now, I believe she would whisper the same word I had just spoken: ready. If you're still watching and can feel the weight of this decision, drop a number 6 below so I know you're here. Now let's discover the turning point. The letter arrived on a Wednesday morning, slipped under my door by the postman who always tipped his cap politely. I bent to pick it up, and there it was. Eleanor's official notice confirming the cease and desist had been delivered to Tyler's company. The language was cool, precise, and merciless. Exactly what the situation demanded. It stated in black and white that the use of my name on permits was fraudulent, that all liability had to be redirected immediately, and that further misuse would invite litigation. I read it twice, the words sinking into me like anchors dropped into deep water. Relief washed through me, but so did the weight of finality. There was no turning back now. By Friday, the ripples spread. The HOA issued fines for the unauthorized patio bar, noise complaints, and parking violations. The paperwork, of course, arrived with my name printed at the top. For a moment, my throat tightened with shame. Even with Eleanor's intervention, the neighbors would have seen it. They would connect me to the chaos at 17 Anson Street, whether I had hammered a nail or not. But Eleanor moved swiftly, filing the necessary motions to redirect liability to Tyler and Maddie. When I called to thank her, she said simply, "It's not about punishment, Mr. Hale. It's about putting responsibility where it belongs." Still, the sting lingered. At the Saturday farmers market, I caught whispers that stung in their own way. A pair of acquaintances from church stood near the peach stand, murmuring about the event house down on Anson. "Heard it's booked out like some shady venue," one said. "Neighbors are furious." Their voices dropped when they saw me, but not fast enough. I kept walking, the tomatoes in my bag suddenly heavy. Gossip moved faster than truth, and it was Maddie's reputation unraveling in public view, whether she admitted it or not. The confrontation came sooner than I expected. One evening, just as dusk stretched over the neighborhood, Maddie appeared at my cottage. Her hair was pulled back hastily, her eyes red-rimmed. She stood on the porch like a child again, but her words came sharp. "You're tearing the family apart. You're letting lawyers run our lives." I gestured for her to come inside, but she refused, arms crossed like armor. I swallowed the ache rising in my chest. "No, Maddie," I said softly but firmly. "Choices have consequences. I didn't put my name on those permits. I didn't throw parties that broke rules. You and Tyler did." Her face crumpled, though anger held it together. "Dad, can't you just let it go? For the sake of family?" I thought of the text she had sent days earlier with the same plea. For the sake of family. As if family meant silence, not honesty. As if love meant shielding her from the mirror of her own actions. I shook my head. Real family doesn't put each other at risk to make a profit. I won't enable it anymore. She left quickly, her heels clicking down the path, swallowed by the night before I could call her back. I watched her go, heart aching with a sorrow I couldn't soothe. Later, alone in the cottage, I pulled out the old photo albums Martha had kept. Pages of Maddie's childhood lay before me, her first day of school, the braces years, the proud grin when she graduated. Each photo felt like a question. How had we gotten here? But the answer, I knew, was simple. Somewhere along the line, Maddie had learned denial was easier than accountability, and Tyler had taught her to call it love. The next morning, Tyler sent me a message, short, sharp, venomous. "You'll regret this. I'll fight back." I stared at the glowing words, my pulse steady. Once, I might have replied, let myself be pulled into his theater of threats. Instead, I forwarded it to Eleanor with a brief note. "Please add this to the file." That was all it deserved. Tyler thrived on confrontation. I had no intention of feeding him. That night, I sat in the garden, the storm damage already forgotten by the air. The sky was clear, stars pricking the dark, the soil still damp beneath my chair. I breathed deeply, listening to the cicadas and the distant hum of traffic. Consequences had begun to fall, not through rage or revenge, but through truth made steady and undeniable. "Maddie blamed me," neighbors whispered. Tyler threatened, but the foundation of deceit was cracking under its own weight. I sipped my tea and let the night settle around me. Sorrow and resolve lived side by side in my chest. Uneasy companions, but companions nonetheless. I knew the road ahead would not soften. Yet for the first time, I felt I was no longer the man left standing on a porch, unwanted and erased. I was a man reclaiming his ground, one careful step at a time. The morning came quiet, the kind of stillness Charleston rarely offers in summer. I rose before the sun climbed over the harbor, brewed a pot of coffee, and sat at my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad. The house smelled faintly of rain from the storm that had rattled its windows days earlier. I sipped slowly, staring at the blank page before me, and began to write. Not a to-do list, not expenses, but the things that still mattered. Dignity, legacy, honesty, and Martha's memory. The words felt fragile at first, then solid, as if naming them gave them weight. For the first time in months, my fight wasn't only about defense. It was about building something purposeful out of the ruins. Later that afternoon, I returned to Eleanor Park's office. The same harbor view stretched across her windows, steady and wide, like a reminder that life carried on no matter how fierce the storm. She listened carefully as I described the backlash from the HOA, Maddie's accusations, Tyler's threats. But when I finished, she tapped her pen against her notebook and steered us in a new direction. "Mr. Hale," she said, "you've protected yourself from immediate harm. The next step is protecting your future. The best protection is to decide where your legacy goes." Her words landed heavier than any legal document. She explained the possibilities, revising my will, establishing charitable trusts, creating endowments that would live longer than I would. She spoke of structure and safeguards, ensuring that Tyler could never twist my money into more schemes. Each option sounded less like punishment and more like peace. I leaned back in the chair, listening as she described engineering scholarships, community projects, foundations that could carry my name forward. For the first time in weeks, the conversation wasn't about what I might lose. It was about what I could still give. I thought of Martha. Her voice drifted through memory, like the scent of her gardenias. The best legacy is kindness with boundaries. She had always believed that generosity meant little if it enabled recklessness. As Eleanor spoke, I imagined Martha nodding, her hands folded in her lap the way she used to sit after long shifts at the hospital. She would have been proud to see me redirect my energy into something constructive. She would have told me it was long overdue. When I left Eleanor's office, the sky over the harbor had softened into blue, streaked with thin clouds. My phone buzzed as I walked along the sidewalk. Maddie's name appeared, and I hesitated before opening the message. I don't know how to fix this. I don't want to lose you, but Tyler says you're destroying us. My chest tightened at the words. She had written of fear, of love, but her voice was still tangled in his. She didn't say, "We hurt you." She said, "You're destroying us." Even now, her truth was filtered through his lens. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and walked. The city streets stretched familiar, brick walls scarred with centuries. Shutters faded but still standing. Charleston houses had survived wars, hurricanes, and time itself because their foundations were sound. Family, too, should rest on foundations. Mine had been weakened by deception, but that didn't mean I couldn't build something steadier for the future. The decision settled over me like a tide rolling in. I could no longer preserve appearances, no longer cling to the illusion that silence would keep us whole. My responsibility was not to Maddie and Tyler's comfort. It was to my dignity, to the values Martha and I had lived by, and to the generations who might benefit from what I left behind. Maddie would not inherit unconditionally. If she ever received anything, it would bypass Tyler completely, and the bulk of my estate would go where it could create good: scholarships, housing initiatives, community programs. That night, back at my cottage, I pulled Martha's photo from the mantel. Her smile was gentle, her eyes alight with the strength that had carried us through so many years. I set the photo on the table beside my coffee cup and spoke aloud, though the room was empty. "I'm finally doing what you always asked of me, drawing the line." The words steadied me. I sat there long after the sun slipped behind the rooftops, the garden beyond my window glowing with twilight. For months I had been chasing a family that no longer wanted me in the same way. Now, I was choosing something different. Not revenge, not bitterness, but resolution rooted in purpose. The sorrow remained, yes, but it was joined by a strange, quiet peace. And for the first time in years, I felt I was living not in reaction to betrayal, but in pursuit of something that might outlast it. If you're still here and want to see how resolution begins to form, type number 8 in the comments. Now let's move forward to the path of closure. The formal signing felt less like paperwork and more like ceremony. Eleanor's office was brighter that morning, the harbor beyond her windows lit by sunlight glancing off the water. 2 witnesses sat across from me, their pens poised, a notary seal resting on the desk like a final verdict. Eleanor slid the thick stack of documents toward me, her eyes steady. My hand didn't tremble as it had the last time. Each signature carried the weight of finality, the deliberate strokes of a man who had chosen not just to survive betrayal, but to define his legacy. When the last page bore my name, Eleanor pressed the notary seal into the paper, leaving a raised impression that seemed to echo in the silence. "It's done," she said. "Your estate is now protected. The distributions are clear and incontestable." She reviewed the details once more. Funds directed to engineering scholarships at the university, a trust for affordable housing initiatives, and contributions to community programs. Every line ensured that what Martha and I had built would outlast us, beyond the reach of Tyler's greed. I tucked the sealed copy into my briefcase, feeling as though I had just sealed a foundation against future storms. A few days later, Maddie called. Her voice was strained but carefully polite. "We need to talk as a family," she said. I agreed, though I told Eleanor I wanted her present. She didn't hesitate. "If they're confronting you, you shouldn't go alone." We met in the living room of the Anson Street house, its polished wood floors gleaming under new light fixtures. The house looked less like a home and more like a venue, chairs arranged neatly as if for an audience. Tyler lounged against the fireplace with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. Maddie sat stiffly on the sofa, her hands twisted in her lap. I placed the envelope on the coffee table and let Eleanor open it. The silence broke quickly. Tyler scanned the first pages, his smirk dissolving. His voice rose, sharp and bitter. "You can't do this. We're family. You owe us." He slammed the papers down, pacing the room. "Do you know what this makes us look like? Do you know what people will say when they find out?" Maddie leaned forward, her eyes wet. "Dad, please, think of the children. They'll grow up with nothing if you do this." I breathed slowly, forcing calm into every word. "You already have something. The house. That was your inheritance in advance. What you did with it was your choice. This isn't punishment, it's protection of myself, of Martha's memory, and of what I worked for my entire life." Tyler's fists clenched at his sides. "This isn't over. I'll fight it. I'll drag you through court until you can't stand it." Eleanor's voice cut through the air, cool and professional. "The documents are ironclad. Any contest will fail. And be advised, futile litigation can result in penalties." Her presence was a shield, and I was grateful for it. Maddie's face crumpled. She reached for me as if trying to bridge a canyon. "I don't want to lose you," she whispered. But behind her words, I heard the same refrain I had read in her messages. Tyler's voice woven into her own. Her plea was not to rebuild family, but to preserve convenience. I looked at her, and for a moment, the little girl in the fairground photo flickered in my mind, but the weight of the present pressed harder. Tyler stormed out, the door slamming so hard the glass rattled. Maddie remained seated, tears sliding down her cheeks, before finally following him. Eleanor gathered the papers calmly, tucking them back into her folder. She placed a hand on my shoulder. "You did the right thing," she said. Walking home, the streets felt quieter, though maybe it was just me. I had no illusions that this confrontation had solved everything. If anything, it had carved the divide deeper. But for the first time in months, the lines were clear. I was no longer their shield or scapegoat. I was simply myself, standing on my own ground. That evening, I brewed tea and sat in my familiar armchair. Martha's photo rested on the mantel, her smile soft in the fading light. I raised the cup toward her picture. "It's done," I murmured. "I've drawn the line." The house creaked gently in the night breeze, the garden beyond rustling with peace. Loss weighed in my chest, but alongside it lay something sturdier, the quiet dignity of a man who had chosen truth over illusion. My legacy was no longer in their hands. It was safe, secure, and directed toward good. That was enough. The evening settled over Charleston with a softness I hadn't felt in months. I sat on my porch, the boards worn smooth from years of use, a cup of tea warming my hands. The air carried the mingled scents of salt from the harbor and jasmine from the garden Martha had planted long ago. For the first time since this storm within my family began, the silence felt less like emptiness and more like renewal. I thought back to the moment that started it all, the sting of standing on Maddie's porch and being told I was an embarrassment. The rejection had cut deeper than any wound I'd known, not just because it came from my daughter, but because it revealed the truth I hadn't wanted to see. That day, I was reduced to an unwanted guest in a home I had paid for. Since then, I had endured fraudulent permits, inspectors scribbling my name on violations, neighbors whispering about the event house, and Tyler's venomous threats. Each ordeal stripped away illusions until only the core of the matter remained. I had given too much, and in return, they had taken everything for granted. Maddie is quiet now. I haven't heard from her since that final confrontation, when Tyler raged and Eleanor stood steady beside me. I suspect Maddie is caught between shame and loyalty, unable to break free of the man she chose. The silence between us is a wound, but not one I regret inflicting. I realize now that sometimes love means refusing to enable, even when it costs you closeness. Protecting boundaries is, in its own way, protecting the person who cannot yet protect herself. As I sat there, I let my thoughts drift beyond Maddie and Tyler, toward what still lay in my control. I imagined students receiving scholarships with my name written at the top, their futures opening because I drew a line. I saw families moving into homes built through the trust I had established, children laughing in safe yards instead of listening to parents fight about money. Those images gave me a sense of peace deeper than any reconciliation built on lies. Legacy, I realized, is not measured in who inherits your possessions, but in what survives of your values. Martha's voice returned to me once more, as it had so often during these trials. Kindness is not weakness. Don't let them confuse the two. I whispered the words aloud, the night air carrying them like a prayer. Kindness is not weakness. Thank you for reminding me. Her picture sat inside the house, but I could almost feel her presence in the quiet, approving of what I had finally learned to do. Draw the line firmly, without cruelty, but with conviction. It struck me that boundaries are not walls. They are doors, ones we choose who to open to and when to close. For too long, I had left mine wide, letting anyone walk through, even those who trampled the floorboards. Closing that door now did not make me loveless. It made me whole. I leaned back in the chair, tea cooling in my hands, the porch light casting a warm circle around me. The world outside my fence would continue, neighbors laughing, ships moving through the harbor, Tyler and Maddie grappling with the consequences of their own choices. My world, smaller but steadier, was enough. Betrayal had stripped me bare, but it had also revealed the strength beneath the scars. That is the strange gift of pain. It shows you what matters and what never did. Tonight, I understood the message of my journey. Family is not those who exploit your kindness. Love without respect is manipulation. Dignity must never be bargained away, not even for the illusion of harmony. I raised the cup one last time toward the darkened sky. Martha, I said softly, it's done. And for the first time in a long while, I felt not defeated, but complete. In the quiet aftermath of betrayal, what remains is not the sting of words or the weight of broken promises, but the clarity that comes when illusions are stripped away. Life often demands that we face painful truths, that trust can be exploited, that generosity can be mistaken for weakness, and that even the bonds of family are fragile when not grounded in respect. Yet, within that recognition lies a deeper strength. Boundaries are not acts of cruelty, they are declarations of dignity. They mark the line between enabling harm and choosing self-respect, between being consumed by resentment and stepping into peace. True legacy is not measured in possessions handed down, but in the values preserved and the good created in the world. When kindness is paired with wisdom, it ceases to be vulnerability and becomes instead a force for justice. To choose resolution over revenge, to transform grief into purpose, is to reclaim power that betrayal sought to steal. In the end, storms reveal what is fragile, but they also uncover what endures. When the noise fades and the dust settles, what remains is the steady knowledge that dignity kept is more valuable than approval lost, and that choosing integrity over convenience shapes not just one life, but generations to come. Peace is not found in silence or surrender, but in the courage to honor oneself, even when it means walking away. These turning points remind us that setting boundaries and valuing ourselves is not just an act of courage, it's the foundation of living with dignity. Now, I'd love to hear from you. What's one lesson from this story that you feel connected to, and how will you apply it in your own life? Let's grow together by sharing our thoughts. If this story resonated with you, drop a 1 in the comments. If not, feel free to leave a 0. Your feedback helps us improve. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that touch the heart and spark reflection. Thank you for watching, and here's to living life with strength, honesty, and authenticity.